meeting into being. Thank you very much, Tom. It is good to see everybody's icon. I appreciate y'all being here. Today we'll be discussing the comments that we received after our public meeting on the plan. For you that were at the public meeting, I think it was a tremendous success. And I really appreciate all the support we've got, and especially Catherine and her team and the folks at REWA. They really made it a special event for us. So I think it was well received, and I appreciate the folks that were there and then decided to comment on us as John has distributed. The comments were very thoughtful comments, and we'll get into those. Um, and then we will be discussing the RBC and our future planning activities and our implementation. Um, and then we'll discuss the process on uh, us approving and voting on the final plan once it is polished off based on the comments we have today. So with that said, I would accept a motion if anybody is willing to uh, approve the agenda.
I so move to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, don't say
Aye.
anything. Say aye. Thumbs up. However, what's the best way to do that, Tom?
If anyone objects, please
That's a
step
good
forward.
idea. So, does anybody object? Hearing no objections, we will mark this approved.
Casey, I'd also just like to add thanks to everybody who was able to donate an item for our raffle giveaway. People really enjoyed that. And for full
Absolutely.
transparency, the money that folks provided to me for purchasing the food, actually, it was too much. So I gave the difference to Casey to cover the cake price. So the money was used, and just wanted that to go on the record that I didn't pocket any of it, and I appreciate everybody contributing.
Yes, it was not a profit-making venture, but it was a great venture. So, um, and the cake was delicious. So we appreciate everybody contributing to that as well. And one other thing for the folks that were there, hopefully they all received a little pin. For the folks on the call that weren't at the meeting, if you will reach out to me with a good mailing address, we had these little RBC pins made up. And I'll get one out to you because I don't know when our paths will cross in person. And just a little memento. You can wear it, it's magnetic. You can wear it as a pin if you see fit. Also, for our golfers, it may make a good ball marker. It's got a little weight to it. So hopefully, it will bring back fond memories. Uh, John shared that this is our 25th meeting. Um, so that's quite a feat for all of us, and especially for the folks that have never missed a meeting. I certainly appreciate y'all being here for this duration. The next thing we need to do is Tom had distributed the April 16th meeting minutes and summary. I would accept a motion that we approve those.
So moved.
Second.
I think you got a second from Guy.
We got a second. Thank you, Guy. Um, all those opposed? Hearing no opposition, we will approve the minutes and the summary. Um, I guess the next thing to be discuss is Water SC has continued to uh, meet and do their work. I think the meeting was actually June 19th instead of the 12th. Um, and
Sometime, yeah, I got the date wrong, but
yep,
Right.
that's fine. And uh, at that meeting, Water SC invited RBC chairs and vice chairs to come and discuss the RBC or the process we've been following, the framework, and our experiences. And I will ask Catherine to share her thoughts before I go too deep into mine.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, so we had a pre-call actually with Myra and some of the DES staff to just kind of prepare, and essentially we were asked to think about a handful of questions. I can put them in the chat just if you're curious what those questions were. But the anybody who attended, regardless of which RBC they were representing, was allowed to sit kind of at the front of the room. And we were asked questions panel style, pass the mic down. I think we heard some common themes that there was a lot of effort put in, obviously, to these plans, and the hope is that Water SC considers those. We also afterwards, after we spoke, we went to individual tables and kind of powwowed to help them come up with some agenda items for their August retreat, which is going to be not open to the public, and that's going to be the Water SC group meeting and kind of figuring out their game plan for how they're going to put together the water shed plan for the state. And at least at my table, there was pretty general consensus that clearly a lot of work's been done. We don't need to start from nothing. And their request to DES was to kind of consolidate all of the recommendations from each of the individual RBCs to at least start as a baseline. And so that would be a deeper dive to Chapter 9 from all of the different basins. And then there's going to be some clearer consideration, it sounds like, to just the Catawba model and what they've been doing for the past 20-ish years. And then also just some consideration that Santee is going to be moving very quickly and will obviously not have a Chapter 9 available at this time for them to consider. So they'll want to just like circle back with that group. Heard some general concerns about interbasin transfers. That was a big topic that seemed like there was a desire from Water SC to seek more clarity on how those work. Also, a strong call for better collaboration across state boundaries where our watersheds do overlap. It sounds like, just by the nature of how the Catawba Basin came to be with the states suing one another, that, we do have that line of communication that occurs pretty regularly across North Carolina. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. And then there's a lot less, it was very much acknowledged that that communication to Georgia is not nearly as strong, and that's an area of opportunity and growth for the state. Those are some things. Casey, go ahead, and if I think of anything else, I'll jump in after you.
All right. Well, I agree with everything Catherine said. I think it was a well-received meeting. The meeting is available to review. They did videotape it. I don't know, Catherine, you're more inclined to be able to find links and send links. If you could
Got
send,
it. On it.
I appreciate it. Um, But I think, like I say, just here listening to the folks from Water SC, that there was strong acknowledgement of all the work that's gone into it, and that there's been a desire for some of the folks that are on Water SC that are also on RBCs for them to adopt the framework that we've been following. I think that is going to continue that effort. Of course, the framework has changed a little bit, you know, that the PPAC isn't necessarily what it was if it exists, and how, of course, DES and DNR have different roles, with DES taking on the vast bulk of the water planning moving forward. So they've just got to figure out some of those details on how that's going to be done, and I think they'll be discussing that in the August meeting. There were several comments, myself included, talking about the importance of relationship building, knowing the folks at the table, uh, to come up with, you know, the best plans for a basin and for the state. And I think that was one of the big drive. I think that thought pattern is one of the big drivers for them having a August workshop. I think the workshop is going to be up in the Greenville area. It's kind of an overnight uh, meeting, or, you know, I think it's half a day into the evening and then coming back on the next day. So hopefully they'll have a lot of uh, good response from that and get a lot of good work done. So uh, I don't know. I have not talked to Jill. She's with Rural Water. She sits on Water SC, and I'm her alternative, her alternate. I don't know if she needs me at this meeting, or, you know, if alternates are welcome. I'll let y'all know if we have a seat at the table or not. But she and I are very much in line with the process that they're going through, and kind of an RBC, because she's also the chair of the Upper Savannah RBC. So she very involved, and she was a member of the PPAC, so she's very involved with what the original intent was, what all our work's been, and how the RBCs view that the process needs to move forward. So I think I think they'll get some good work done in August. Um, Anything else on that, Catherine?
Oh, I think Robert has a question.
Yeah, Robert has a question.
Yep. Sorry, Robert.
That's okay. So Catherine, I was especially intrigued by the comment that uh, that Water SC would like DES to compile recommendations, and I would like to offer a suggestion that perhaps DES rank order, if if DES goes through the Basin Council reports that have been finalized or drafted and says, well, heck, 5 of them make this recommendation, 6 of them make this recommendation, that DES somehow let Water SC know that these recommendations came from multiple basin councils. This recommendation came from one, so that it
Yeah.
gives Water SC some informed decision making.
I think that's the intent. When we talked about it, you know, obviously, like, we started by looking at some of the broad NPD recs, right? And if we didn't like the language or felt it wasn't very clear, we finessed it. And so I'm hoping that DES, like, puts like with like, and is like, okay, recommendation, and themes it, and is like, recommendation about this topic, here's the 5 different ones that came from 5 different um plans, and this is the wording that was used, so that they can be like, okay, we only need to carry one of these forward, not all 5, clearly, if they decide they want to. I That was how I took it away, and how I think it would be best presented to Water SC, but I don't know how DES is doing it. Maybe somebody on
I
the
was
call
about to say,
talk about it.
Joe or John, do you want to offer up any ideas or thoughts on
Uh,
that?
No, I will say that process is already happening to some regard. And I'll give an example. We're reaching out to the Catawba Water Management Group to get their recommendations. You know, so they've been following kind of their own process, not necessarily a planning framework. They're developing an integrated water resources plan, not a river basin plan. But at the same time, we're interested for the purposes of the state water plan in getting their recommendations across those three categories: technical, program, planning, and then policy, regulatory, and legislative. So we compiled all of the recommendations from the RBCs, including the Santee, which have been working on several categories of recommendations, and recently gave those Catawba Water Management Group in a summary format, kind of just how Catherine suggested. You know, we've highlighted where there was consensus among RBCs and where similar recommendations were made. That's more so to help them come to kind of a quicker consensus on which ones they also support. Once we get their feedback, then the intent is to kind of continue that process of highlighting commonalities among recommendations, especially for the policy, regulatory, and legislative category, and highlighting those in the state water plan. Whether that will be useful for the Water SC group or not, I'm not sure. And what their output is going to be is still, I guess, a little unknown. But at a minimum, the water plan will highlight where there was consensus among RBCs on recommendation types. And Joe or Scott, if either you want to add to that, or feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach will be very similar in presenting a summary of recommendations that have been made by the RBCs to Water SC during this retreat in some format, and then letting the discussion go from there, and then taking Water SC's recommendations and summarizing those into the state water plan along with the Santee RBCs is generally the approach.
Okay, any other questions or comments about the most recent Water SC meeting, or for Casey or Catherine? Nope.
All right, John, it's all you.
Yep. One other news item I'll mention is the Lower Savannah Salkehatchie has their public meeting next Tuesday, July 22nd. It's going to be at the Lake Warren State Park in Hampton. Taking some ideas from the Saluda RBC, we're doing some activities that will hopefully draw some more attendance to that. One is going to be watermelon provided by Coosaw Farms, and then 3 of the water utilities are having somewhat of a best tasting water competition. It's more so to highlight the different sources of water. So water from McQueen Branch, Crouch Branch, Florida Aquifer, and Savannah River. But we're going to have all that. Yeah. So that kind of came out of your idea, Catherine, to provide Greenville water. But here we're going to do a little bit of a taste test and see if anybody can differentiate the difference between surface and groundwater and from the different aquifers.
So I want to know who wins. That's so fun.
Okay. But you're all welcome to attend. It won't be broadcast virtually. It's just an in-person meeting like your Saluda one was. But if you can make it down to Hampton, you're certainly welcome. I think that's it for upcoming events, unless Catherine, you want to do one more plug for the Convergence Conference in December?
Yeah, sure. Confluence. Yeah, that's put on by SCAWWA, and SCWEA is the organization in South Carolina. But as a reminder, it rotates between North Carolina, Georgia, and South Carolina. So this year it's in Georgia. It'll be in Savannah, December 4th and 5th. What better place to be around the holidays? It's always really pretty in Savannah that time of year. So, and it's at the DeSoto, which is fun. Nice, just like old-timey place. And I can put a draft agenda in this chat for anybody that wants to see what the current agenda is. So you can decide if you want to register. But the hotel block is open.
All right. Thank you, Catherine. Public and agency comment. If anyone from the public or agency members would like to make comment, please raise your hand or unmute yourself. Hearing or seeing nothing, let's just move on. The main agenda item today was we want to review and discuss where needed the public comments that we received. So I circulated those earlier this week, and I'm going to share them on my screen here. We got, I don't know, 40 or so comments, which was great. And the comments are all very thoughtful. I'm glad to see that a number of folks actually read the entire plan, not just the executive summary, and again, provided very thoughtful comments. 6 different commenters. So I'm going to kind of quickly walk through those. Most of them I don't think deserve or need much discussion, but I want to give the RBC members the opportunity to weigh in if they have suggested revisions to the response or feel like we should respond in a different way. Please speak up or raise your hand, and we'll address those as we go through them. As I go through these comments and responses, note that the comments are in the black text and the responses are in red text. And in instances where I'm going to make, or I suggest we make a change to either the plan itself or sometimes the executive summary, I've highlighted those changes. The highlighting will go away when we publish this appendix in the final document. And the highlighting now is just for my sake and your sake to know where we need to make updates or revisions to the plan itself. So the first set of comments were submitted by Guy Hochstetler from Friends of the Reedy River. His first comment was just a suggestion about adding hyperlinks to the TOC. We can do that. So in the PDF, there'll be hyperlinks that can take you to each chapter. So that's not an issue. We'll address that. The second comment had to do with the fact that the map that we've shown and has been shown throughout all the plans and the planning process doesn't typically show the full extent of the watersheds for each river basin. And what he's pointing to is the fact that the PD, the Catawba, the Broad, and the Savannah all extend up into North Carolina or into Georgia. So his recommendation was, can you revise that graphic or add a second graphic that actually shows where those occur in the adjoining states, which is something we can do, and that's something we'll be doing for the state water plan as well. So we will update that graphic where it appears in chapter 1 to show the extent of each watershed that occurs in the other states. Doesn't apply to the Saluda, but certainly applies to 4 of the others. His next comment was about recommendations and assumptions. And specifically, he was referring to a discussion during the public meeting about the extreme drought scenarios. And I think Grace presented that information. And his comment or question was about were the same conditions, the same extreme drought conditions modeled in the Savannah River Basin, the upper Savannah part of the basin. And they were. So we crafted a response that makes it clear that the upper Savannah had the same extreme drought scenario run for it, and then a couple others. And the statement that we had in the Saluda plan, which suggests that water could come from Lake Keowee, reflects the fact that when water is coming from Lake Keowee during that extreme drought, the upper Savannah is also experiencing that same extreme drought. So hopefully our response clarified that. He had a comment about assumptions and made the point that assumptions are very important. So he was kind of suggesting that we emphasize those assumptions and perhaps to make them more clear. We have assumptions scattered all throughout the report. Each chapter has its own set of assumptions, and we don't specifically list each assumption as they appear in the chapters. You basically just have to kind of read the chapter. So we've tried to point out where we've got key assumptions, especially like in the demands chapter. So hopefully our response kind of clarifies that there's assumptions throughout the report, and you just kind of have to find them by reading the report. And again, anybody please stop me if you have a suggested revision to a response or some way to make it clearer, or if you feel like we're not adequately addressing the comment. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep moving through these. Okay, then he did have a number of comments just about suggested rephrasing or correction of a few typos. Those are pretty straightforward. I appreciate all those and agree with all of them. We're going to incorporate his comments for rephrasing and fixing the typos in the plan and executive summary, but I'm not going to go through each of those right now. He had a comment on data, or several comments on data. The first one had to do with the demand section, and he was questioning the source of driver variables. In the response, we've noted that the driver variables and those sources for the driver variables are all explained in the methods for off-stream water demand in South Carolina. And that reference was actually included, I think, in the chapter, but we've included it again here. So the response basically clarifies that for more information and to learn about those drivers, refer to the methodology document. He actually then refers to that methodology document in his next comment. And his question here is about, was there consultation with the energy utilities and the power producers? And our response was that, yes, we certainly did collaborate with Duke and others during development of their demand projections for all of the scenarios. So we just clarified that did occur. A third comment about data, he has a suggestion offering readers calculation demonstrations showing the values you plug into SWAM. I think our intent is to not get into that level of detail in the River Basin Plan, but refer to the SWAM Users Manual and the Surface Water Modeling Report. So we've crafted a response that kind of directs him towards that if he's interested in that. Okay, then he had a couple comments about current situation and trends. And they center around data centers, which has come up in discussions in many of the RBCs, including the Saluda RBC. And he cites a couple recent news articles that talk about data center growth and the development of AI and how it requires facilities that often require a lot of water. So we've crafted a response that kind of acknowledges that we consider data centers. We talked about their potential impact on water resources in the basin. However, we didn't do any specific modeling scenarios to assess impacts of potential hypothetical data centers within the basin. But that's certainly something that could be done as part of future planning efforts. Okay. He had a suggestion for an addition. He was reading chapter 6 under the agricultural water management strategies, and he's suggesting a strategy of employing regenerative agricultural practices for soil management. So although we didn't specifically identify regenerative agricultural practices as a specific water management strategy for agricultural users, we did refer to it in one of our recommendations in Chapter 9. The recommendation was focused on reducing sediment loading, and we had a bullet there that emphasized regenerative farming practices. So I've crafted a response that suggests, we appreciate his comment, and we can consider it as part of a future update to the plan. So adding that to the toolbox of strategies, explicitly adding that to the toolbox of strategies, even though we did refer to it as a recommendation. Right. And then he had some recommendations here, and I'll just read those off. Our response is basically just to acknowledge those and consider them during future deliberations of the RBC, but he had a couple suggestions. Gather more recent data directly from their sources, example, Duke Energy and Greenville Water. Decide and agree ahead of some reasonable scenarios that may quickly run through SWAM. Discuss SWAM outcomes, review trends, and raise concerns where trends are troubling. and then use new technologies to improve the analysis and minimize over-reliance on historical data and forecasting. I think to some extent we've talked about each one of those in the past, and those are good things to consider as we continue the planning from here on. Catherine submitted several comments.
John, before you go on, I think there was a
Sure.
comment about one of those.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Shay said, would you mind reviewing the response about water use and data centers? Let me back up to that one. The response here was that data centers, their potential water demands, and their impact on water resources were discussed. However, we didn't do any specific scenarios. We may look at that in the future. Shay, do you have a suggestion on how that response could be improved, or? Did you just want the opportunity to?
Sorry, I forgot I had my microphone here. I guess the only recommendation I would make would just be, something about like getting some sort of advisory um, from engineering firms that deal with data center to get more clarity on water usage. That would be my only. But I know that with the basin plans, you guys try to stay a little bit broader. I was curious more than anything about like what the response was. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that question's come up as well. And that's something that may be addressed by DES as part of the state water plan. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, around how much water use data centers have, how much they consume, withdrawal versus consume, and some of these new AI data centers consume a lot more than typical server farms. So that may be something that's very useful as part of the state water plan that can be clarified. I think you touched on this. We're trying not to pick on any one industry and focus on their demand and use of water.
Of course, I get it. Again, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt progress. I was just curious what the response was. But I do know of one person, I'll put it in the chat, that might be able to help clarify, or just for any future questions for the count for Saluda.
Sure.
If
Okay.
I can just add for information's sake, I know that there was a bit of talk about this at one of the Water SC meetings, that they talked a bit about data centers and the concern that they would pose. There wasn't a deep dive. It was just a conversation, but I'm sure that will be in their discussions moving forward. But I would ask Joe and Leanne, have we had any in the any data centers in the state come for a direct withdrawal permit, or are they all? My understanding is they are all looking to tie on to a municipality or a public water supply and not get into the water production, water withdrawal on their own. Do those exist in South Carolina?
Yeah, there is one that has a capacity use permit down in Berkeley County.
Okay, on a groundwater withdrawal.
That's right.
Okay. Very good. Have we gotten any applications for a surface withdrawal?
That's historical. Leanne might could fill in the detail as to when that was processed, but no current applications are in house.
Okay.
Also, no need to apologize. We want people to participate in today's meeting, so please interrupt. Like Casey and I have already gone through this like 3 times, so.
Hi, this is Melanie. The comment on the regenerative ag, I thought was a good one. And I wonder if there's a way to, I know we've already done our recommendations, but to incorporate that in a general way to point out the benefits of regenerative ag practices for increasing infiltration and increasing drought resilience.
So we could do that if the RBC wants to update the plan before it goes to final. We don't have specific mention of regenerative farming practices as a category in chapter 6. And we don't identify it as a selected strategy in chapter 7. But Melanie, that said, if you want to propose that we add that to the list, to the toolbox of strategies in chapter 7, and we include a short discussion of it in chapter 6, that could be done. Happy to, do a quick vote or see if the RBC is behind that.
Yeah, I'd be interested what other folks think about that.
Mhm. Thompson, representing the ag community, how do you feel about that? Do you think that would be a worthy addition at this point, or better left for future discussions?
Well, the only concern I have about it is when we get to using terminology like regenerative agriculture, I'm not sure how well defined regenerative agriculture is. And, you get down the road a few years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and nobody even remembers what regenerative agriculture meant. So that would be my only objection to it. It just makes sure we understand what regenerative agriculture is.
Okay. Melanie, would you want to offer up a definition to consider? And we would define what we're talking about as regenerative agriculture if we introduced it into chapter 6.
Yeah, I would be glad to send you something, and it would just be something in a very general way. Those practices that, cover crop no-till systems are an example of regenerative ag that helps to promote soil infiltration. Those practices that improve soil health. Yeah, I'm glad to work on a
Okay.
little blurb to send you if you like.
Yeah, so we do talk about cover cropping. I think no-till is mentioned. Those are introduced in chapter 6, and I believe made it as part of our toolbox of strategies in chapter 7. We just didn't frame it as practices that fall within the regenerative agricultural category. So maybe it's just kind of reframing how we introduce those strategies as.
Did we identify them as strategies for soil erosion control and sediment control, or did we mention their benefits as for helping to promote infiltration and build drought resistance?
More so for the former, but we could add to the discussion to emphasize infiltration and drought resistance.
That's
I know
what I'm getting at, is to make sure we
Yeah.
include those benefits in there, because that's what we're talking about here mainly is, for quantity and
Okay. I guess I'd suggest then take a look at chapter 6 again, and I can send you the Word version. And if you want to add a couple sentences to emphasize those benefits, which we probably didn't emphasize in chapter 6, we can.
Okay.
That'd be useful?
Yes.
Okay, and that's not really, I don't see that as a major change to the plan.
Right.
Anything really needs a vote. It's just clarifying something that we've already got in there and highlighting its additional benefits.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to be clear from the agricultural perspective. Of course, we do endorse all of those type of conservation practices out there, cover crops and whatever else we want to mention in there. Like I say, my only concern was make sure that whatever terminology we use is well understood.
Yeah.
And I have to echo Thompson's comment that it's a wonderful buzzword, but USDA has yet to define what regenerative agriculture is. Yes, they encourage producers to employ regenerative practices, but it is not a specifically defined term by USDA yet. So again, I have to echo Thompson's comment that we need to be clear how we are using that term.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah, it's thrown around a lot and can mean different things. So we'll be careful how we use that, or maybe not use it at all. Just mention the specific practices themselves.
Okay, that all sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have any problem with, making some general comments about, using practices to improve soil infiltration, soil health, water quality, quantity, all of that kind of stuff, reducing silt loads, sediment loads, and all of that. And like I say, Robert and I are on the same page. We just don't, and also Melanie, we just don't want to use a term that's not well defined.
Understood. Okay. All right, moving on. Catherine had submitted several comments, and Catherine, majority of your comments, I think, were more focused on how the information gets considered by Water SC and rolls up into the state water plan. But do you want to kind of just walk through the gist of your comments?
Yeah, happy to. And some of it just has to do with recent things that have occurred. And so I talked over this with Casey, and I'm not asking formally for any recommendations to change. It's more just this, I feel like all this should be considered when we get to the implementation phase, and welcome any feedback from the group today. So the first comment is really just around the fact that, there was an in-depth analysis done on census data very early on. And unfortunately, like that data, changes on an annual basis. And so some of the projections are not even keeping up. The high projections and the moderate projections that we used in our model aren't keeping up with what the South Carolina Office of Revenue and Fiscal Affairs currently has as our projections moving forward. And so I just note that, already, in my opinion, our population data that feeds into those, the SWAM model is outdated, in my opinion. And so that is something to consider. And ideally, that's the kind of thing that gets updated kind of on an annual basis. So that's really my first comment. Second is just about land use trend analysis, knowing that other RBCs, specifically the Catawba, are looking at land use trends and changes. And, that was outside of CDM's scope, and something that we've talked about in general a lot during meetings. And I just wanted to kind of formalize a comment that, land use affects where utilities expand, where they grow, the demand within a sub-basin, both from a water standpoint and then thus the sewer shed standpoint. So I just wanted to kind of make a comment about that. And those two, I specified at the top that these are comments based on my experience as a professional planner in the basin, and have a lot to do with the work that I've done for utilities across the state. The next three comments are more.
Before you get into the next slide, maybe have a question on one of the first.
Go for it, please.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Just a comment on the population projections. It is too late to consider changes now, of course, but just wanted to let Catherine and the group know that me and staff are looking at more recent projections and working on that. In fact, I think there's a new projection data set coming out soon, which we want to get our hands on as well. So we're going to look at that, and if we see anything worth sharing in there, we'll reach out. Okay.
That's awesome, Scott. And I will say, I know RFA, the dashboard that's live is based on vintage 2022 data, which is a data set that the Census Bureau releases on an annual basis, and it's always like a year behind. And so the 2024 data just got released in March for counties, and I believe in May at the census tract level. So the data that I'm showing on that bottom line is even 2 years old now. And there are other data sets like Esri does 5-year projections, which are really good. But the problem with all projections in general is the further away you get from the present and the more drastic the change of the growth happening in a certain area like Greenville, where you're seeing heavy population change, the less accurate the projection gets over time. So it's not a perfect science, and there is no like one way or the highway when you think about projection. So it's very complicated, just in case anybody wanted to know that. And if anybody wants to talk about population projections in more detail, I've deep dove it. So holler at me. Happy to be a resource, Scott.
Yeah, Catherine, you referenced that 2023. Was that just county estimates of most recent population you mean by that? That didn't include projections in that set, right?
The 2023, I believe, is what our census vintage data set was built off of, according to Alex Pellet. Like when we had that conversation like a year and a half ago.
All right, maybe at some point we have an offline conversation about it. We don't need to
Okay.
get too distracted about it now. But yeah, we're looking into it. Just wanted everybody to know.
That's awesome. Okay, so my last 3 comments were I was wearing my vice chair hat. The first is just, you know, for better or for worse, I've just been exposed to more of the Catawba watery work in the last like couple of weeks or several weeks. And I was like, well, you know, seems like they're doing some things, and clearly they have a very established financial model and a completely different reason for starting their group in the first place. And there's a lot of work that, you know, went into their beginnings, but there could be some lessons learned that have happened over in that basin that we haven't even thoughtfully considered as a basin. And so that's something that I think we should do during the implementation phase. The second one is because of our pre-meeting that Casey and I had to prep for the June 19th Water SC meeting. You know, I kept hearing the phrase that the state wants a living document. Also, I reheard it again on June 19th, and I heard it on some of the recordings from prior Water SC meetings. And I just wanted to kind of shine light on the fact that to have a what I consider to be a living document, you need some live data and a place to go look for that. And I didn't put that here, but South Carolina Office of Resilience, for example, has live data that is being fed all the time. So we could have updated census data being fed. We could have updated land use data being fed, climate considerations being fed onto some sort of live dashboard. And that's, I think, something the state should be considering, mostly for ease of use moving forward with this document, so that, you know, when we are asking municipalities to consider all of the work that we've done, we're not asking them to read the hundreds of pages of our plan. We're asking them to use tools that are easy to digest as they look to do their comp plan and that type of thing. So I just heard that living document phrase enough, and I was like, well, if we want that, there's work to be done still to make that occur. And then my third comment was just kind of to the group, which, you know, we've learned so far that there isn't a formal onboarding plan for new RBC members. And so I did kind of pose to the group, you know, did we want to come up with a more formal recommendation for what we deemed a good strategy for, you know, bringing new members on board? And I think previously have stated an idea on a call of just like, you know, what does it mean to onboard all these new people? And I did bring that up at the June 19th meeting to Water SC to just say, you know, it would be nice if it was like thoughtfully done and efficient, and you're not onboarding on this like alternative schedule for every RBC, because that's not efficient. So I think I've asked John to just put under all of my comments that comment is acknowledged and the Saluda RBC will consider during implementation. But if you guys disagree or want to talk through any of what's been said, let me know.
Good. Anyone have questions or comments on Catherine's comments and responses? Okay, moving on. Mountain Bridge Trout Unlimited submitted handful of comments. First one had to do with uncertainty, and their suggestion was that we include a detailed discussion of uncertainty, and they recommended perhaps integrating that in section 7.4, which was a short section that talked about adaptive management. I think that's a very good suggestion. I haven't yet done it, but I'm going to add some language that tries to better introduce and explain the key uncertainties, whether it be with regard to modeling or data that goes into modeling or any other thing that we use to come to our recommendations and conclusions. There's a number of uncertainties already identified in the Saluda SWAM model report from 2017. I'll touch on some of those, but I will expand that adaptive management section to include a short discussion on uncertainties. Okay, then they had some specific comments. First one was about water quality considerations may be more fully developed in future updates to the Saluda River Basin Plan. Their comment was that quality issues should be addressed as soon as reasonably practicable. I think that's just something the RBC should take into account as you continue your work during the next plan update and before even the next plan update. There was a request to identify in Chapter 2 the actual 18 regional fish species of greatest conservation need. So I will get with DNR and add a table or list off those different 18 fish species. There was a request to actually identify the several tributaries that are classified as ORW, TN, or TPGT. We can address that comment as well. We'll either add a table or list those, somehow include them in there. Okay, there was a comment and more so of a question about potential impact or cumulative impact of unpermitted, unregistered users that fall below the 3 million gallons per day threshold, which would require you to get a permit if it's surface water or a registration if it's groundwater. The response to that we've crafted is that did come up in RBC discussions, especially I think it came up with regard to groundwater. There was concern that the cumulative impact of domestic withdrawals for household supply for folks outside of public water supply areas. Does that have impact on stream base flow or other impacts? And while we didn't do any type of definitive estimates to quantify that, I hope I'm accurate in saying the general consensus is we don't expect on a basin scale for those small withdrawals, whether it be surface water or groundwater, to have any significant impact. But we do acknowledge that there could be impact of cumulative small withdrawals at certain parts of the basin, like especially near headwaters of streams. So that's acknowledged, and we can better explain that and acknowledge that in the report, which is what I've offered to do. Everybody comfortable with that response? Okay. Okay, I had a couple comments on the ecological flow relationship work that Clemson and USGS helped. The first comment was with regard to not doing any assessment or analysis in the Blue Ridge ecoregion. They note that it's a significant uncertainty and should be discussed. They ask for discussion of the data needed to reduce this uncertainty. And if you recall, we talked about that to some extent and had Luke Bauer available for that discussion. He and Brandon Peoples actually prepared two different proposals. One specifically focused on collecting additional data from the Blue Ridge ecoregion. So to address his response, I'm intending to go in and add some more information that characterizes that data that Luke identified as being necessary to be able to conduct that assessment. Okay, the next comment had to do with estimates of potential biodiversity loss and the flow metrics. quantifying this as an uncertainty, basically, and how changes in these factors could affect flow ecology relationships. So I've offered to go in and specifically identify that there's uncertainty around the impacts of future climate, future land use changes, and how those might impact that flow ecology relationship, impact biodiversity. Okay, they had a couple comments that just said that they concur with the planning process recommendations and the technical and program recommendations. So it's good to see agreement there. There was a comment then on, similar to the previous comment about encouraging more fish and macroinvertebrate data collection in the Blue Ridge province. That was one of the technical program recommendations. The response here, and Mike Waddell, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this response, if you have any, or if you're in concurrence with it, but kind of explained the process that we went through, where we identified, or we talked about why there wasn't enough data there. They provided those proposals. We talked about, well, could we just use the existing data and not spend more money to collect more data? Ultimately, we developed a recommendation to just kind of further continue that discussion during our implementation phase. But Mike Waddell, are you comfortable with that response? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think not only that you need to contact DNR. I mean, like I've said, they've been collecting data up there since '86, but nobody's mentioned about checking what the Forest Service has been doing. And I know that they've been doing studies, so we need to include the Forest Service database too.
This is the U.S. Forest Service?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, I'll add that to the response. That could be one of the things we do as part of the implementation phase, checking on data availability through them.
Okay. Other than that, I'm good with it.
Good. Okay. Okay. The next one, they said they concur with the policy, legislative, regulatory recommendations. Again, good to see the concurrence there. Comment here about funding opportunities. They suggest revisiting the section in Chapter 10 that talks about funding opportunities, given recent changes in funding sources at the federal level. We did make some updates right before we updated the draft plan. And Grace is not on, but she went in and added a new sentence just to clarify that, the funding section in the federal funding table is current as we best know it as of June, July. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about clawbacks of certain funding programs. But we did remove like the BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, that was administered through FEMA because that program's been terminated. And we made a couple other updates. So we've done as much as we could, given what we know right now. Okay, and then they had a couple comments, or about 4 or so, on Appendix C, which is the report that Luke Bauer and Brandon Peoples prepared on the flow ecology relationships. The responses that you see here were generally provided by Luke. Let's see, the first one was about impacts to aquatic invertebrates, and noting that data is not presented, and Luke's clarified that they did see some useful relationships, but they only occurred within one stream class. So kind of it is what it is, lack of data there. They were looking for sampling point locations. We provided a reference to a link that they can view a journal article that's got those locations. Luke's provided a summary of the biological and hydrological data sources that were used in the analysis. And then there was a question about strategic nodes and why there weren't any in the southeastern plains. And we've clarified why that happened. Basically, there was no SWAM modeled tributaries that had upstream withdrawals, therefore the analysis really wasn't useful. Any other comments or questions on those responses? Okay, hearing nothing. We had a couple of comments submitted by a professor from Furman University. Said the plan is very well written, covers important objectives. That's nice to hear. First couple comments were on chapter 2 and specifically around climate, and he's making the request that we add information from tropical storm or tropical cyclone Helene from late 2024. Hope and the Climate Office did provide some information that we included in the Upper Savannah report to characterize Helene. I intend to grab that information and put it in the same climate section in the Saluda report, so I can take care of that. And then the second one was about stream gauges and basically flows that resulted from Helene. I think also address that one by adding in some specific information for gauges in the upper part of the basin, of the Saluda Basin. So I intend to address that as well. There was a comment here about modeling data gaps and stream flow gauges. They're emphasizing the importance of gauges, and they support the effort to maintain and expand stream flow gauges. We basically just had a response that says we appreciate a review and concurrence with this recommendation. The next one has to do about future SWAM modeling, and they're pointing to the fact that the EMIP phase 6 scenario should be used. So that will be taken into account if any climate modeling is done in the future. All right, any questions or comments on Professor, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Colo?
It's Coelho. He's also a Friends of the Reedy River board member.
Good, okay, thank you, Coelho. Okay, Brandy Amadon.
John,
No.
before you move on, I thought Shay may have a comment to add.
I do have an update on streamflow gauges. Clemson, one of the Clemson professors, Christopher Post, has created this program called the Bridgebox program, where for, I guess, about a tenth of what the USGS gauges cost, he's created a system where it just is like a laser that's attached to bridges, and it updates every 6 minutes. So it takes a stream depth measurement, and you can predict stream flow pretty well from those gauges. Right now, they've been in the process of implementing them this summer. They're meant to supplement where there are data gaps with the USGS. They've got about 80 installed so far in the upstate, and I think the goal is to eventually have them in bridges and culverts all over the state.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Tom, I believe, has mentioned that in past meetings, and you may have mentioned Saluda RBC meetings. I can't remember, but I know you brought it up a couple times. Robert, did you have a comment or question?
I did have a question about that. I had seen that announcement, and I'm curious if whether concurrent with the installation of one of those sensors, there is also a stream profile, which is one of the substantial inputs for a USGS gauge. In order to determine flow, you need a stream profile so that you know the volume of water moving across the stream at that gauge point.
They do have a stream profile. That is part of the initial findings. So yeah, so it is pretty accurate data, and exciting because it's easy to implement, and they're putting it online this summer.
Good. Okay, thank you, Shay. Brandy Amadon, who's the mayor of the city of Travelers Rest, had one question. Are there any zoning or best practices cities can tap into to support all of these initiatives? So as part of our recommendations, we do touch on a number of best practices, actions, not necessarily zoning. And what I've tried to do is consolidate all those into a list. Those come from 2 or 3 different recommendations, primarily focused on reducing or mitigating sediment impacts. But we came up with a good list of a number of best practices that'll hopefully be useful for her, which we've consolidated here. Again, these are all in Chapter 9, part of our recommendations.
Just a quick comment that we are not related.
Yep, not related. A final comment was submitted by a gentleman named Jeremy Wolfman. I'm not sure if he has an affiliation, but these were submitted through, Tom, I can't remember now. They were submitted through
Charlie.
RBC. Charlie, yeah. His comment, he acknowledges that he read the executive summary and maybe the 2-pager, but didn't dive into the full report. His comment was about metrics and suggesting that some metrics be established to track progress. If he had read the full report, he would have seen at the very end of Chapter 10, we did develop progress metrics. So in our response, we've just acknowledged that. We do have a way to kind of track the success or failure of implementation. Okay, that is it for all the comments.
John, I have this is Melanie, a comment on the previous one. You know, we say improved, and this is to do with stormwater ordinances. We say improved stormwater ordinances, but we're not very specific about that. And I wonder if there's a way to weave this little micro recommendation into what we already have, and that is I would love to see our municipal stormwater ordinances evolve to volume control. Some places are already doing this, but what I mean by that is most ordinances or stormwater design standards require that you match the pre-development to the post-development peak flows for certain design storms. And now we know that, you know, reducing that does not get to reducing the overall volume of stormwater runoff from developed sites. So, I mean, it gets to all these tools that can be used to do that, but having those design standards that focus on stormwater volume control, meaning practices that help to promote infiltration, on-site storage, or reuse. So it does get directly to the quantity control runoff in the waterways.
Okay. Other RBC members, do you want to comment on that suggestion? I think what you're suggesting, Melanie, is we strengthen one of our recommendations to specifically indicate that we recommend volume controls. Correct?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Do we put that in the plan, or do we emphasize that as we develop the implementation plan? Because I think the overall desire is that folks in authority to do that, we're supporting those endeavors, and we can get more, I guess, specific in our implementation if that's the desire we go with. But it was, I think, originally envisioned that we approve or desire the concept, not necessarily the specifics.
Yeah, it's a nitty-gritty detail, but maybe we just mark it as a future implementation consideration for implementation. I think it's an important detail, though.
Yep. Well, good. I'm glad to hear you're volunteering for that part of the implementation plan.
Oh, yes, no problem. I got it covered.
Okay. Okay, any other final comments or questions on these responses? Nope. Okay. Well, hearing none, I'm going to finalize this Appendix E, which is comments and responses. Again, everywhere where there's a yellow mark, I'm going to make an update to the plan. I'll talk in a few minutes about what the process will be for reviewing those updates and doing the final vote on the plan, but we'll get to that at the last agenda item. Okay, the next agenda item, discussion of future RBC planning activities. Casey and Catherine during our planning team call wanted to add this and kind of, I guess, begin a discussion with the RBC about where do we go from here. Casey, do you want to lead that discussion or?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. We're going into uncharted waters, as it were, so but this is where really the rubber meets the road. And I know over the last 25 meetings, we thought, oh, there will be an end to this process. But I hopefully we all realize there is no end to this process. We've really just put in place our marching orders moving forward. However, yeah, some of this is going to, it looks like, at least in the interim, shift from uh, um, a funded CDM DES led or supported process to more of a grassroots. This is on us to really work on the implementation strategy and what that looks like for the RBC overall and us individually. So I think we need to start planning on that and figuring out what that looks like and who's going to do what and who's going to be empowered to do what and how we can continue and really strengthen the work that we've already done. Um, Catherine, am I missing anything in that overall concept?
You're gonna go into detail though, right, about September?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, go.
So the detail is, I think we need to start our implementation plan meetings. And I've kind of gone around and round in my head about what that looks like and how that can be done. Um, and what I would like to offer up. Um, and it looks like Thompson will be leading all these efforts. We'll let him get off the call and then figure out exactly what he'll be doing. Um, but what I think I would like to see is us have a meeting in September. And the purpose of that meeting is to, by then, the plan will be totally finalized. So we will have all our marching orders. But for us to sit down and go through the implementation plan and start volunteering and or assigning folks to work on the work that we say we're going to be doing. Um, and so I think September would be a good time for that to occur. We have some not only, internally to the RBC, some work to build on, but because of the turnout of the public meeting, I think there are some community folks that would be willing to jump on board with some of the mitigation components and move forward with it. So, with all that said, is there any opposition to us getting together in September? Um, and I would prefer to have it in as an in-person meeting. I'm not a big, I understand the reality of doing these virtuals, but I think our work is much stronger when we're in person. I feel very confident that my organization would host that meeting there at our office, like we've had so many other meetings. Um, for us to really figure it out. Now, what I would like to propose is we kind of send out the implementation schedule uh, and the components therein, and everybody kind of look at where their desires and interests are, and kind of put their name on the line whether they're interested or not. Melanie's already volunteered once today, but um, I think there's ample opportunity for all of us to put our name in a box or two, um, you know, and none of these things are going to get done if we don't have a champion for them. And overall, the RBC is kind of said we'll be champions, but we've got 25 folks that can get a lot of good work done, but we just need folks to figure out what the support of that is and how we can truly implement it.
Robert, you have a comment?
Casey, I think that's a great idea. Excuse me, I just banged my keyboard. I think that's a great idea. I would make a couple of suggestions. One is for that meeting that we have an understanding as to what support the RBC can expect from CDM and DES and DNR. So that, again, so that going forward, we have an understanding as to what support we may have. Perhaps reaching out to those RBCs that are in this implementation process to discuss, and I think Edisto would be the farthest along, to discuss what pitfalls they've found, what hurdles they've found, what they've done to overcome those, just a discussion with other RBCs that are implementing so that perhaps we don't have to relearn their lessons going forward. And lastly, is there merit in before this meeting looking at the current RBC membership, Saluda RBC membership, and perhaps having an announcement that we might be seeking additional members to replace or supplement our existing council.
Thanks, Rob. I can touch on a couple of those things. So Casey and I just talked about, what do we do with the rest of the year? Because we don't have good clarity right now on the funding that's going to be allocated to implementation for the Saluda. The Broad specifically has been able to meet a couple times, facilitated by CDM Smith, because they had less meetings than we did. We are actually one over, being today being the 25th meeting, which was budgeted for 24. So Casey and I were worried about waiting for clarity on that and not at least, having some level of commitment moving forward. And so we talked about in September having an in-person meeting. Casey and I are happy to, lead the agenda for that and even facilitate if need be. And then ideally we have, we split up, do some things, come back virtually in November is roughly what we were thinking, to just say, hey, this is kind of what we discussed as a group, what we think should be 2026 priorities. And then fingers crossed by January, we have the statewide plan, we have some clarity, and we maybe can hit the ground running in January. That was kind of our thought process, but we're open for feedback because we're just trying to avoid, okay, bye everybody, see you in 2026. Especially because we don't know what that level of support is going to be, and we don't want to wait for that clarity.
And I'll add to that briefly. Although the Edisto was the first to finish, they haven't formally met during their implementation phase. Only the Broad has had any implementation type meetings of any of the RBCs, and they met twice. So that's where things stand on implementation. And Joe or Scott, feel free to speak up here, but just in general discussions, there's kind of a push to more or less wait until the state water plan is done before decisions are made about how the RBCs will be supported, what funding might be available. But again, that's more of a DES topic to discuss.
Yeah, I think we hope to have some clarity towards the end of the year. I mean, obviously, we've gone through a couple major transitions in, bringing the DNR hydrology staff over from DNR and folding them into DES over the last year. And then with the executive order, expediting the production of the state water plan. We hope that process will provide some clarity on how we implement both the state water plan and the individual basin plans, and continue keeping these councils together. And what support we can provide is something that I can't, speak specifically to at this time, but certainly we're discussing it and hope to have some clarity towards the end of the year, early next year.
And kind of my vision for the September meeting is, all the folks on this call will be invited to the meeting. I don't know if their organizations will support them to be able to attend or participate. We'll have it open virtually, just like our traditional ways of doing it. I'll have to get with Tom on how that can be done, since he's our online virtual meeting expert. So, but if they can't participate for whatever reason, I don't, and Catherine and I discussed, we just think it would be a mistake for us to wait until we know exactly what's going to happen moving forward to not act on what we said, the work to be done is. So with that said, I will pick out a date in September, kind of send a meeting request. I'd ask that y'all, thoughtfully consider being there in person. I'll feed you. And we'll probably do it just like we did a regular RBC meeting. And, I strongly encourage the folks on this call or your alternatives be present, and, we really start working on implementing our plan.
One last suggestion, Casey, and that is, since we have been meeting on the third Wednesday, perhaps that be the initial target date, third Wednesday in September.
I agree. I've just got to check our schedule to make sure we don't have anything conflicting, but that's what I'll shoot for.
We can't. You and I already had this conversation.
Oh, that's right.
There's a conflict on that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was what is it? It's some conference meeting, something or other. It was for you. I don't remember what it was.
Hold on.
17th.
Yeah, that's just the day that I'm covered up with conferences or project meetings. Tentatively, we'll push it to the 24th, the next Wednesday.
Casey, I gave you a list of all the dates in September I could do. That's not
I
all.
know it, but you act like I acted upon that. Um, again,
I
I will
think we
figure
should,
out a
why don't we do
date.
this? We can set out a doodle poll. You
Exactly.
just
We'll
need to
send out
respond to me on which of those dates that I sent you work for you, and then I can do that. How's that sound?
perfect.
I'll add one more thing to address something you mentioned, Rob, was that I think when we talked or when we pulled the RBC members that had 2-year terms back in April, I think all but one, and that was I think Devon Orr with Rural Water, said they were interested in continuing. So I feel like of the existing RBC members, most of them would want to continue on regardless of whether they had a 2 or 3 or 4-year initial term. So. And I think still you all are the largest RBC. So you do have strength in numbers. Okay. Okay.
Well,
Casey,
and I'm sorry, just one last thing I wanted to let the RBC know that we will actively be trying to do. And there is certainly one of our recommendations, and I think it was also of the Broad and the Upper Savannah to develop an interbasin council with those 3 basins since our worlds interact so much with each other. And we will actively be trying to set that up, and I'll keep y'all informed as that continues. But like I say, just talking to Ken Tuck, who was or is the chair of the Broad, and Jill, who's the chair of the Upper Savannah, there is a desire for that to occur. So I think we'll be able to move forward with that in the next 2 months as well.
and that reminds me, Casey, I think we have within our scope, CDM Smith scope, as facilitators for the Santee RBC to potentially organize an interbasin river council meeting for the Santee and Broad and Saluda and maybe Catawba, since they all feed to the Santee. I have to go back and check. So there might be an opportunity to for the whole Santee larger basin to meet.
Okay, great.
Okay, last agenda item, quick discussion of the process for taking our plan from draft to final and getting your final vote on the plan. If you remember, there's 2 steps in voting on the plan. First step is voting on the draft plan, and that's where you give your 5-point rating. We've done that process. What we're going to now is the second step, where you don't do a 5-point vote. You just say whether you support the plan or you disagree with the plan. Since everyone generally voted on a 1 or 2 or even a 3, perhaps, I don't think that any of the revisions that we're making in response to comments would knock anybody down to a 4 or 5. I certainly hope not, which would suggest that everybody's going to vote to support the plan. But what I intend to do is address each one of those comments. And I don't know that I'll send out a full version of the plan. I think I'll just send you the pages where I've made revisions and highlight those revisions so it's easy to find by this Friday. At least that's my goal. Let you review those, and with the understanding that everything else in the plan remains unchanged from the draft version, ask for you to email me your final vote, whether it be you support the plan or you don't support the plan, by next Friday. Everybody understand that process and comfortable with it? Okay,
Yes.
and I'll spell that out again in the email that I send out again, hopefully on Friday, which will include any pages from the plan that have revisions. And
So the final voting would be done by Friday, the 25th, correct?
Correct. Yep. If anybody has any suggested tweaks to the plan revisions that I'm going to be circulating, I'd ask that you send me those before the 25th. And if they're good, I'll send them back out to the RBC and just say, by the way, so-and-so RBC member suggested a slight revision here. This is what we're proposing for the final plan. There's not a whole lot of revisions I'm making, and I don't expect they'll solicit really many comments. So not too worried about that. But if that happens, then I'll try to get you revisions to the revisions before next Friday. All right, any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, that was the last agenda item. I don't have anything else I need to cover. I appreciate everybody's patience today and for your feedback. Casey, do you want to wrap things up?
I do. I'll agree. I appreciate everybody being here, being involved in this process. So, and we're very close to having a final plan, which is very exciting. Um, I'll send out that meeting request or figure out when we're going to make the request, and Catherine will be developing a doodle poll because I've heard of that in conversation, have never done it. But we'll get that squared away so we can move forward. Is there anything else we need to discuss from anybody on the call? No hands, no comments. So with that, I would entertain a motion that we adjourn.
Motion.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor, say goodbye. Y'all
Thanks,
take care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, John.
Yep.